Hello and welcome to a new episode of Interpreting India. From geopolitical complexities to economic uncertainties, India faces critical challenges in its quest for a more prominent role on the world stage. This season, we at Carnegie India continue to bring voices from India and around the world to examine the role of technology, the economy, and international security in shaping India's future. In this episode, we will be looking at various aspects of technology, such as AI, fundraising, friendshoring, and defense innovation, and how they might work in the Indian context. As you all may know, India has recently announced a national AI mission, a draft deep tech policy, and is one of the partner nations of the US when it comes to the ISET and the INDESX. Also, given the significance of secure and trustworthy supply chains, the topic of friendshoring has never been more relevant. Joining us today to discuss this topic is Karl Mehta. Karl is the chairman of the Quad Investors Network. He is a serial entrepreneur, author, investor, engineer, and civil servant with more than 30 years of experience in founding, building, and funding high-tech companies in the US and international markets. Prior to leading the Quad Investors Network, Karl was the founder and CEO of an artificial intelligence-powered knowledge cloud platform, EdCast Inc., which was backed by Stanford University and acquired by Cornerstone Inc. In 2011, Karl established the Mehta Trust, his family office for philanthropy and investments in early-stage tech companies and venture capital funds in Silicon Valley. Karl served as a White House Presidential Innovation Fellow as well, selected by the Obama administration during the inaugural 2012 and 13 term. In 2014, he was appointed by then-Governor Jerry Brown to the Workforce Investment Board of the state of California. Karl won the Entrepreneur of the Year award from Ernst & Young for Northern California in 2010. Karl is also the founder of several nonprofit organizations, including Code for India, and the author of Financial Inclusion at the Bottom of the Pyramid. His new book, AI for Digital Public Infrastructure, was released recently. He has also been appointed as adjunct professor at Deakin University's Applied AI Institute. Karl, welcome to Interpreting India.
Thank you, Konark. Great to meet you.
So let's start with the first question, something which I've really, which has been at the top of my head after having sort of tracked your career and tracked your profile as one of the most renowned entrepreneurial investors and, sort of people in the field, in the innovation and the deep tech space. What are the key metrics and factors which you look for when evaluating an investment pitch?
Sure, that's a good way to start the conversation here. In general, now a lot of VCs or even entrepreneurs try to segregate deep tech, which is a lot more, deeper technologies, longer-term view, and breakthrough technologies, as opposed to an incremental innovation that we've seen, which is also very important in the society to make progress. So, I think there are different metrics where, from an investor lens standpoint, when you look at an incremental innovation versus a breakthrough innovation. I think the big difference between the two is that when it comes to deep tech, we have to take a longer term view, and you need a patient capital because the market is not readily available, but you are investing in a technology which is more fundamental in nature. And as you develop that and invest in that development, it can open up over a period of time a lot of new markets that you've never even thought of, even when you're investing or even when you're building as an entrepreneur. You have no idea which applications this technology will go into. So it requires a tremendous leap of faith in the technology. It requires a very deep understanding of the technology. And it requires a long-term patient capital, which is a very big difference compared to an incremental innovation. Think about a SaaS or an enterprise application or even some, consumer application where the very first thing that you see is how big is the market size and, how cool is the technology, how great is the team. And you have a very clear line of sight in terms of the ROI that a potential user or a customer will get out of this product. And that becomes extremely important in terms of what we call the product market fit that, every VC talks about. But that PMF metric applies only to that incremental innovation. It doesn't work. Obviously, you will miss out on a lot of great deep tech innovation if you speak the same metrics about PMF. And I think in deep tech, one of the key metric that we would look at even before market size or even solution is actually the team, because what you're really betting on when you're investing in deep tech is the credential and the background of the team, because the problem that they are solving, it may shift in definition over a period of time. Even the solution that they are pitching you initially, it may shift over a period of time because it's a matter of iteration. So what you're really betting on is really the people. Whereas when it comes to incremental innovation, team is important, but you are also focusing a lot on how big and real is the market, because you are betting also on near term revenue. So you want to make sure that the market really exists and the solution is proven in terms of at least technology. You're not taking a technology bet. You are just taking a bet on converting the technology into a product that will fit into the market. So very different lens for both of them. And both are, of course, equally important. But I think it's good to see now that, in the US and India and many other countries now, there's a lot of interest in deep tech investments, which earlier, few dozen years back, it was mainly the area of government investments. Like in the US, the National Science Foundation, NSF, pours in, millions and billions of dollars into the, science and research.
That's a great segue into our next question. And I think the government of India might have been listening to you, Mr. Mehta, because recently they've been coming out with this range of policies on deep tech innovation. And I think the idea here is to sort of incubate breakthrough innovations. So while the policies are sort of separate for semiconductors, they're yet to announce a policy for AI, but they have a national AI mission. And they've also got a draft deep tech policy right now, which is in draft format. But what do you make of this recent push in India into creating homegrown hardware and deep tech companies? What is the purpose behind this recent push by the Indian government?
Well, I'm quite excited, and I'm glad to see that India is putting a lot of focus on manufacturing and in hardware, and particularly in semiconductors. It was something that India should have done probably 30 years back. That's when China and Taiwan and South Korea, the Asian tigers, Singapore, and to some extent Malaysia, they all picked up really well the semiconductor industry, and India missed the bus 30 years back. Well, the good news is that this is the second opportunity where the window has opened up, and I'm glad that India has an ISM, which is the India Semiconductor Mission. I've been also working very closely with the principal scientific advisor in India, Dr. Ajay Kumar Sood, who is also a co-chair of my Quad Quantum Center of Excellence. And I've seen great things coming out of his office. Some of the things that you mentioned, like the deep tech policy, the national AI mission, the national quantum mission. But particularly to your point about hardware, it's not just India, but even the United States has now realized that over the last 25 years, we moved out hardware outside the country looking for cheaper labor. And so US has actually, missed out on a number of hardware innovation because we gave away the hardware. And not just our industries, but even our venture capital ecosystem here has been funding more software because it's faster scale and faster returns, and have kind of had slowed down investing in hardware. But now there is a certain there is a good recognition that we have to get back into hardware, which is important, and getting into hard tech. So I think coming back to India, yes, I am absolutely excited about it, and you're seeing some great success already. I think there are 5 big deals that has been announced in semiconductors. My friend here at the SIA, the Semiconductor Industry Association, has been working closely with the Indian government as well. We've seen Sanjay Mehrotra making the first big pioneering start with Micron. Putting up the back-end ASAT facility in Gujarat. We saw the announcement of Tata Electronics, as well as with CG Power, with Renesas. So there's some number of really good deals that are coming through the pipeline. And I think India has an amazing opportunity to be a big big part of the semiconductor value chain, and the U.S. is particularly looking forward to have this value chain, coming up, particularly in India.
That's really great. I think the push for sort of domestic manufacturing and hardware innovation has to come from within. But then there's also this thing at play now called friendshoring. This is a new phenomenon which is sort of been spoken about in the last 3 or 4 years. As the chairman of the Quad Investors Network, how do you view the onset of friendshoring among allies and partner nations when it comes to tech supply chains? What are the more promising sectors for collaboration among the Quad countries when it comes to friendshoring options?
Well, given the geopolitical reality that has been shaping up over the past several years, one of the big factor in trade and collaboration and businesses, cross-border businesses, is trust. I would say that trust is the new currency between two companies or two countries to trade with each other. It is important to meet price and performance in order to win business. Whether you're a company or a country looking for trading with another company, but now there's a good realization that is setting in that we might be shooting ourselves in the foot by thinking too much short term if we only look at just the commercials and ignore the strategic implication, particularly from a geopolitical standpoint, how things may shape up in the future. So I think I'm seeing more and more companies, both not just the Fortune 1000 companies or global 2000 companies, but even smaller companies taking a more strategic view and saying that who do I want to do business with? Who do I trust? The governments, which are, we are a capitalist country in the US, and the governments don't tell the private business or businesses what to do because the businesses have their own priority and how they run their business. However, now the governments are also getting active in at least helping understand the geopolitical reality and what could be at stake, where are the vulnerabilities. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is that regardless of the geopolitical situation, I think we do have a commercial situation, a concern that everyone needs to address, which is a concentration risk. Over the past 25, 30 years, a number of critical technologies and important technologies or critical parts of the supply chain has got concentrated in very few countries. And we've seen with COVID that if one country is affected, it can have a huge impact on the overall supply chain. It can have impact on consumers. It can have a devastating effect on businesses. So I think you got a two-pronged thing here going on. One is, having some level of risks associated with the geopolitical situation, and second is just a commercial concentration risk situation that both needs to be addressed through the factor of trust and creating this trusted corridor between partner nations who trust each other. And the trust also comes from a value alignment. So countries which are aligned in their values, particularly democracies that see each other more aligned, there's likely to be more business flowing between them as opposed to countries that do not have that values alignment.
Right. So I guess there are two parts of the puzzle which we've addressed so far. One is the industrial policies, if I may use that phrase loosely, by countries to sort of come up with policies to incubate deep tech ecosystem. And then there's also the realization among companies that they can't afford to ignore the geopolitical realities of, trading in geographies where everything is heavily concentrated. So then the question becomes, how do we go about incubating a domestic, once we sort of align these two things, companies having a value system which is aligned with the country's industrial policy. How do we sort of think about incubating a domestic tech hub? I mean, you've had an excellent vantage point when it comes to creating businesses in Silicon Valley, whether as an engineer, investor, entrepreneur. So how does one go about creating tech hubs such as the Silicon Valley? Can this ever be a top-down approach, or is the creation of a tech hub more of an organic endeavor?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Look, I Bangalore has already created a pretty good tech hub, and it's growing. There's a few other centers that I've been visiting in India. Gurgaon has some really good tech ecosystem. Hyderabad has one, and Pune is coming up. And then, worldwide outside of India, you see in outside of Silicon Valley, Israel has a very strong tech ecosystem. Actually, recently, UK has done a great job with in London building that up. Here within the US, we are starting to see, Austin emerging as a good hub. Look, I mean, over the past 40 years probably, a number of countries and delegations have come to Silicon Valley and kind of looked at, what's the magic. My personal, experiences 30 years back when I came here, one of the first things that I noticed, and I would still consider that as like the number one factor that worked for Silicon Valley, which was very unique at that time, is that the very first generation of tech entrepreneurs, the folks like in the 1950s or 60s, like Fairchild and National Semiconductors and those very old companies, when those executives and founders, when they made money, wealth, they did not do what other wealthy people did in other parts of the world. Typically, when people created wealth back in those days, they would go back and put money into some other, non-tech stuff to try to be, risk avoidance and invest money in real estate and stuff like that. These folks did something very unique, and they started investing in the next generation entrepreneurs who were building the next set of technologies. And that, kind of giving back into your industry and kind of nurturing and mentoring, not just with advice, but also with capital, that is very unique, because that risk capital is very, very hard to get. I mean, now we have a very strong VC ecosystem in a number of parts of the world, but, think about 50 years back, right, in the 1950s or 60s. So that's very unique. And now that has continued in Silicon Valley. If you see that most of the people who have created wealth in the Valley, they all become investors in the same sector and in the same area with people whom they see and respect. So I think as long as any place follows that, as an example, as a role model, that's a very good starting point to have that, because the risk capital is most important. The mentoring from an entrepreneur who has already done it successfully is very important. Those two are very important factor. The third factor, which is very important, is obviously the availability of talent. I think Silicon Valley is very unique of having two world-class institutions, Stanford and UC Berkeley, not just providing talent, talented, engineers and scientists coming out of it, but also they have their very strong research. A number of companies has come out of Stanford and Berkeley, which were kind of research projects that, Google was like a PhD research at Stanford. So, very few regions in the world has like two great universities in the same, like think about Bangalore. You have IISc there, right? Indian Institute of Science, which is a world-class institute, but having two more, IIScs there, institutions, and creating world-class innovation and research, that would be fantastic. And then also churning out, great engineers from the IITs. So that's the third factor, which is very important. And then the fourth factor for building a hub is really having in that geography just a risk-taking culture where people are rewarded and for taking the risk. What it means is that if people, they leave their, comfortable job, and if they come up with a great idea and they risk it, and even if it doesn't work out, they are always having this back pocket, comfort that they can get a job somewhere. And so, your willingness to take the risk increases if you know that you're going to be accepted in the society. It's not like that, if I fail, I'm not going to get and nobody's going to fund me next, or I'm not even going to get a job. In fact, in Silicon Valley, it's not now. It's fashionable nowadays to say that, yeah, failure it should be celebrated. But even back in, 30, 40 years back, nobody cares about what your last failure was or success was. Really, what matters here in Silicon Valley is about what idea you have on the table, and can you demonstrate that you can execute on it. So people really don't care about much about your resume. So that's very important, a shift in a culture of risk taking and accepting the giving the second and the third chance to people who have failed.
Thank you for that exhaustive look into what it might take for India to sort of really shift gears into, as it tries to upgrade its tech hubs. But now, also shifting gears here on the podcast, also for a while. Let's talk about AI. And you've written a book on AI for DPI. You've spoken about how you have a good relationship with Dr. Ajay Kumar Sood as well. The national AI mission is something I want to talk about right now. And India announced this national AI mission last month with an initial outlay of around 10,000 crores, which is about $1.25 billion. So one of the most pressing components of success here has been the lack of, or rather the need for compute capacity. How do you think India can go about sort of securing the adequate compute capacity to sort of really, push its AI mission into high gear?
First of all, congratulations that the fact that you even have a national AI mission and the 10,000 crores has been allocated to that. That itself is a great thing. Not many countries are able to do that. So that's a great start. I think second, you're right that look today the race to AI depends on two things. The software and the hardware. Of course, Silicon Valley has the NVIDIA, which is the best in AI processor and GPUs for training and also my inference. And of course, we have the OpenAI and Anthropic and a few other companies leading into the transformer models. I think both of these things are at a very early stage. When you look at the AI, I mean, AI has been in development for more than 30, 50 years. But when you look at the Gen AI and the GPT or the transformer technology, this is all very new and it's recent. So right now that is a concentration of just few companies and only a few countries like the US that's leading it. But there is a lot of development that is happening that is in the pipeline. I think a number of other chip companies are catching up, and they are working on GPUs and hardware that will make it much more lower cost than NVIDIA. Although NVIDIA has a lead, but I think we need more companies. So there's a lot of effort going on. So that's the good news. On the software side, on the models side, I think beyond OpenAI, there are dozens and dozens of companies right now which are being heavily funded by VCs to come up with better, faster, cheaper models. We will be seeing pretty soon. I don't know if you've seen, the companies like Liquid AI and many others like that, who have fundamentally rethinking the whole, neural network, models and making this models work at much lesser parameters, and so it requires a lot less processing power. Probably 20% of what the processing power today OpenAI uses. We might be using that in future. So this is only just this initial spike where the new software is sucking up so much amount of CPU, processing power, and of course energy. So I think we're coming back to India. My thoughts are that I think what they're doing currently is the right thing to do. Invest in the data center capacity, invest in NVIDIA and any other processor that you can get, which are on longer lead times, and get that infrastructure in place. Take some of these models which are open source and build upon it, or even build a completely brand new transformer model and neural network models that are specific to India, for Indian languages and specific Indian applications. I think I'm very also excited by some of the private sector work going on. My friend in India, Bhavish Agarwal, he's launched Kruthim, which is an Indian AI platform that is built ground up. They don't use any American open source. So kudos to him for building and launching that. We should be seeing more and more entrepreneurs like him building from the ground up. On the hardware side, I'm aware of, I'm actually on the advisory board of a semiconductor chip company, which is headquartered in Silicon Valley, but for all practical purpose, 90% of their employees are in India. And they have built and designed a chip for AI inference, which is currently showing results that are even better than NVIDIA. So I'm extremely optimistic, extremely excited about some of the stuff that I'm seeing that's coming out of India, both on the hardware chip design, in AI as well as in the software and models. So things will get cheaper, faster, better, which has been the curve, right, for all technologies over the past, multiple waves over the several decades. And exactly the same thing is going to happen in AI.
That's great. That's a very comprehensive overview of what it might take to sort of really, go into the next phase of the National AI mission. Now, one of the other initiatives that I think which you sort of have a great understanding of is the INDUS-X mechanism between India and the US. And this has been one of the larger bilateral initiatives between both the countries in recent years. While we have seen the launching of joint challenges between DIU and IDEX, how do we ensure that really in the long run going forward, we can enmesh the industrial bases, the defense industrial bases of both the countries with each other? And also, would this require any ancillary reforms in procurement and export control measures?
Yeah, look, the defense ties with the launch of INDUS-X is one of the big success of the U.S. India bilateral, and if I would call it even as a part of the Quad, we are extremely proud of that INDUS-X launch. My friend, Doug Beck, who is the CEO of DIU, which is a defense innovation unit. I've known Doug for many years, more than 15 years, when he was back at Apple. He is a fantastic person to lead DIU, coming from the private sector, and has been in the defense department before that. So the partnership that the US DoD and DIU has with the Indian counterparts, and I was attending the INDUS-X conference that happened in February, I think, in New Delhi. And it was pretty well represented by our U.S. Army and military generals, as well as procurement folks. So there is a strong desire to do deeper collaboration, manufacturing, and include India into the supply chain, and vice versa. So open up the Indian defense procurement for U.S. companies, and vice versa, open up the U.S. defense procurement for Indian defense tech companies. And there was a great show and tell for various companies that were exhibiting that. I think the few things that will need to that we kind of had a consensus at the INDUS-X most recent conference. Number one, the United States has done this kind of defense collaboration already with Australia and with Japan, the two of the other Quad nations. So many things that which we may run into kind of like a new thing with India, and may take a much longer time if it is done just on a bilateral basis. We could cut short that time by putting some kind of a Quad framework to the INDUS-X, which is currently bilateral, and something that obviously I would personally like to promote it from speaking from a Quad standpoint. But it definitely will help both the United States and India, particularly India, and not go through the same things evolution that Australia and Japan, which is now already a very robust relationship, and we could potentially use that as a blueprint. And that was an idea that I had also offered that at the conference, and had a lot of great reception to that. So that's one. The second big thing is that there is the defense procurement is a very long sales cycle, very long developmental cycles. And so, a lot of companies go out of business because, you may, build something and you may not see purchase orders for 7 years, 8 years. And, is there enough patience capital available? And that was one of the biggest concern that I heard from entrepreneurs, particularly in India, in the defense ecosystem. So I think one of the key things that we've been trying to bring in this X is that for larger companies, the kind of like the big ones like the Raytheons and the Northrops and the Boeings of the world, who are the tier one, doing more and more development and leverage India's R&D talent, and because co-development will start some revenue cycle, and it will also create a much more leveraging the local manufacturing as it gets into the manufacturing phase. So just looking for licensing and technology transfer, which may get stuck into export controls and stuff like that. which obviously IndusX is going to have a great way to bring up those hurdles and kind of address those hurdles. So that itself is a good thing, that having that kind of collaboration partnership to address the export control hurdles. But I'm going beyond that technology transfer, and I'm saying, my recommendation is to do more and more joint development. Think about, like, you can take a chapter from the semiconductor industry and learn from it, kind of apply that blueprint. See, India is building up its fab now, in 2024. But over the past 15, 20 years, India has built tremendous capability and muscle in the chip design, right? I think there's over 200,000 engineers in India who design chips for American and European and Japanese semiconductor companies for the past 20 years. It's a huge force. I think it's probably the world's leading chip design country in the world. India is already. So think using that same thing, which is model here, where before we get into manufacturing, and technology transfer, which is a long cycle, how do we start leveraging the great talent, both in terms of talent and cost advantage. And those are two different things, not to mix up the two. There's great talent, which stands independently on its own. And then there is some cost arbitrage, which stands independently on its own. How do you leverage both of them, do a lot of development, and develop IP right there in India, rather than waiting for technology transfer? And if we can achieve that, I think we're going to start seeing a lot of great stuff happening through this collaboration.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mehta. I think tied to this question of defense innovation is also the issue of space tech collaboration. And I think recent years we've seen a mushrooming of companies in India and the space tech ecosystem, and albeit it's at a nascent stage. So which part of the value chain do you think Indian companies can come into? I know that the ISET fact sheet has spoken about ISRO and NASA collaborating on the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program. But are there any other quick wins or any other medium-term wins which both the countries' space sectors can look forward to?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, there's a huge number of startups that I have in my visits to India. I've seen there's probably a few dozen companies now in space sector, which is amazing. And same thing is happening in the US. Same thing is happening in Australia, in Japan. So there's a tremendous growth in startups in the space as the space sector has been opened up. And I've had the opportunity to have great meetings with Pawan Goenka, I think, who is leading the InSpace, which is the India's the space regulator. Look, when you look at the space ecosystem, you can divide it up into the upstream space activities and downstream. And some folks also you can put certain activities into midstream, something which is between upstream and downstream. I think Indian companies and again, space is a sector very much like defense, where revenues can take anywhere from 5 to 6 to 7 years, and so there's a lot of burn rate in development and trying to offer something until it really materializes. So some of the quick wins for Indian companies to be part of the global supply value chain, or especially the United States, I would say to focus more on downstream space activities, which are more related to software, ground station, ground system operations, data related, because that's where India has a massive advantage of the huge number of software engineers and already a very matured software industry. Also, as the components are coming up in terms of semiconductor industry, and so many of the chips and terminals and navigation system devices and stuff like that, all that supporting hardware can be built. And then any other consumer related stuff like the direct to home stuff like that, or even telemetry and tracking and enterprise applications related to space and satellite. So those are all the things which are more low hanging fruit in terms of downstream, more on the earth ground systems. Obviously, some companies have done very well even in the high capex, high risk, upstream, which is sending satellites in the space. And I'm aware of a few companies in India. but those are doing some space research or sending satellites. Now, but those are reserved for fewer companies that can get very large capital and venture capital investments. The other area is obviously ability to launch payload at lower cost. Right now, Elon Musk's SpaceX has kind of perfected and mastered the art of both the sending satellites into the space station and sending payloads, which are sending rockets to the space station, and with the payloads at a pretty decent cost. But I think as India develops that with ISRO and many other private companies, that is another area where India can be very helpful for both the U.S. And also to, I think, SpaceX and other countries for that. And then there is also some really good collaboration that India can do with Australia and Japan. So, but I think in summary, there's lots of opportunities across, mainly downstream, but also midstream and upstream.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. That's a very thorough overview of the entire value chain in space tech. And I think certainly some news for policymakers, at least. I'm sure the space companies would be aware of these issues, but maybe the policymakers would be really benefited by these insights.
Thanks, Konark.
So with that being said, I think we have reached the end of our podcast recording.
We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. To make sure you don't miss it, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. To learn more about our research and team, you can visit us at carnegieindia.org. You can also find us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you for listening. See you next time.